everybody who has encountered pornography and uses it regularly is traumatized. Like that's my stance. I think when we have a sexual experience that's outside of God's heart for us, it hurts us. You could call that a little trauma. I think some of it is truly big T trauma because the content can be so awful and the regularity with which it's consumed, I think, can be so awful. So yes, my stance is that more often than not, trauma is part of the foundation. It's part of the source of use.
Welcome back to the Truth and Fertility podcast. Today, I am joined by Rachael Killackey. She is the founder of Magdala Ministries, which exists to help women heal from sexual addiction. So something that is incredibly necessary, an incredibly necessary ministry. I'm very honored to be talking with her today. I was just telling her a good priest friend of mine told me that she is one of the only people that he would trust to give a chastity talk. So I'm so honored to sit down and chat with her and pick her brain. Rachael, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm glad we finally got it to happen because I know you and I both as young moms had to reschedule a billion times. So I'm glad to be here.
Life happens. Yeah, me too. So Rachael, can you introduce yourself, maybe introduce a little bit about Magdala, but also I know you have a story and I know that story is what gives you your passion for this ministry and really is the reason why you've just dedicated your life to helping women heal from sexual addiction. So I'd love for you to share that story if you're willing.
Yeah, totally. Okay, I'll go through incrementally. So I'm Rachael. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm a wife to an amazing husband, mom of 2, and I'm the executive director of Magdala. I'm also a part-time PhD student in theology, so I'm just, flying by the seat of my pants. That is the best way to describe it, this season of life. Over-caffeinated and overstimulated, if you will. I founded Magdala. Yes, for real. I founded Magdala in 2021. I started working in this topic when I was a college student at Ave Maria University in Florida. And I ran a support group for fellow female students. I was about a year into recovery myself when I started that group. And then moved on to other things after graduation, grad school, whatnot. And then an invitation came a few years later to start essentially a ministry for women seeking recovery from sexual brokenness. So I was encouraged to start that by just someone in the field and then launched. And we've been going for 5 years now. So we tend to serve about 500 to 800 women a year. We've had hundreds of women go through our groups at this point. We offer virtual support groups for women all over the globe. And then we partner with college campuses and parishes to run groups in person. And all of our groups use our curriculum that we've compiled by a team of women, specifically for women, and reviewed by a team of clergy and experts just for theological and psychological soundness. So we love what we do. It's definitely a niche topic, but I would not want to be doing anything else at this point in my life. So very, very grateful.
Amazing. You said 500 to 800 women a year.
Yeah, that kind of depends on how many groups we have running, how many campus partners we have. But yeah, our wait list is currently sitting at 1,000 women. So we can't keep up with the demand. And I can say more about that later, but it's been busy.
Yeah, in a good way, I'm sure.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So go into your story, Rachael. Where did this all start for you?
Where did it all start for me? Well, like most adolescents, I was exposed to porn when I was in 8th grade. So I was 13. That's actually later than the average at this point. The average age of exposure for girls, I think, is sitting around 11, and for boys, it's 9. And then that exposure led to about 6 years of regular use of pornography. I developed what's, in the addiction framework is called a dependency upon it. So lots of compulsive use of pornography, typically to dissociate from just negative feelings and experiences that I had, traumatic experiences that I had. And I kind of white knuckled my way into sobriety in college. So it's a very long story of kind of how I came around to that, but had some really profound spiritual experiences with the Lord, where I just felt invited to surrender this part of my life. And then it was kind of a lot of habitual change after that. So the spiritual experience was really important and very healing, but it didn't end it. And I think it's important to emphasize that now, because when I first started sharing my story, I think people thought it was like this one profound moment and then it's all done. But there's a lot of habitual work that needed to be done too, but I did it largely alone. So there were no other women in my life that were talking about this. I didn't hear another woman speak about it actually until I was a year or two into sobriety. So I really white knuckled my way in and then didn't really do a lot of the internal, deeper healing work specifically around the trauma that I had experienced until a few years later. So after I graduated to college and whatnot. And so Magdala was sort of born out of this hope that no woman would have to do that. No woman would have to heal by herself or try to stay sober by herself. And even once the temptation to use pornography sort of left my everyday life, and it's not part of my everyday life now, there was still so much mental and emotional work to be done and spiritual work to be done. And so even women who have perhaps not used in several years or acted out sexually in an unwanted or destructive way in several years. Even if that's their story, I still want them to have a safe place to do that mental and emotional and spiritual work. So Magdala was born definitely out of my own isolation in my story. I like to say it's half like pastoral support and half advocacy. We're also just trying to let people know and let the church know that this is a male-female issue. It's not just a guy's issue, and that everyone sort of deserves support in the midst of what's becoming a deeply over-sexualized culture. So, yeah.
You said that the average age for girls now of being introduced to pornography is
Mm,
11, and for
yeah.
boys it's 9.
Hmm.
What is that? And maybe if you could go into a little bit about how was it an accidental thing? Is it an
Yeah.
accidental thing for most kids? Was that how you came across it?
Sure.
How does that normally start for a young kid like that?
Yeah. I like to say I've never met a person whose first exposure is their fault. So even if you look it up, right? Even if you're a 9-year-old who's looking up something, you have no idea what you're looking for. You actually don't know, and so you can't consent. So I like to say all exposure is accidental. Even if you, as a child, willingly look something up. Um, Mine was actually through social media. So it was through Pinterest and it was written pornography at first. It was erotica. So it was like fan fiction or something about a band I listened to at the time. And Pinterest just popped it into my feed. And so, and once you click on one, the algorithm picks it up. And so then I got more and more and more and more. And then I started finding it in other sources, and then it turned into visual and written together. As it was all sorts of mediums, but the first medium I encountered was written pornography, and that's more of a gateway for girls. Boys are less likely to sort of experience continual use of erotica. I've met men who do use erotica, but it's just a lot more rare. But it's a huge gateway drug for a lot of girls, a lot of women. So and some remain there, but most of the time they go into other mediums, so video or other.
Yeah. That was actually one of the questions I wanted to ask you
Mhm.
was how, because I know your ministry is specifically for women
Mhm.
healing from sexual addiction. And so I'm sure that men and women experience pornography and experience sexual addiction differently. Can you
Yeah.
go into that a little bit and explain the difference?
Sure. Yeah. People usually ask me this question, so it's something I've spent a lot of time researching. Um, it's actually funny how many similarities there are before there are differences, because I think when we think of it, we tend to just sort it into this like sexual dichotomy of like, what is it? The men are from Mars, women are from Venus, sort of thing. But actually, when it comes to content like pornography, men and women actually experience them somewhat similarly first, and then differences show. So there's a study that I like to cite. I think it's from like 2012. I don't love the ethics of this study. I feel like I always give that disclaimer, but two female psychologists had like a group of men and a group of women, and they showed the same visual pornographic content to each man individually and each woman individually. And then afterward asked them to like basically list what they attributed their arousal to. And the men almost unanimously said that it was the attractiveness of someone in the video, and the women almost unanimously said that it was their ability to imagine themselves as someone in the video. So it was their ability to place themselves in the situation. It's called mental framing, is what some clinicians call it. It's how a lot of people actually cope with abuse, is they frame it differently in their mind as something they want or something safe or something okay, so they can get through the moment. So mental framing is like kind of an interesting evolutionary thing. And women actually have predominantly developed it for obvious reasons. So um, men and women actually interact with a lot of the same content. They do end up doing it differently. So um, I think that kind of helps overturn this sort of like men are visual, women are emotional thing. Is I do think there's an emotional aspect to women's use that welcomes in a medium like erotica in a way that men don't. But women absolutely seek out visual content and experience it sort of in that mental framing sort of sense. But men and women are gravitating towards similar kinds of content. Jay Stringer, an author I really love, he actually says that women are starting to consume violent pornography like BDSM and other things at higher rates than men, or at quicker rates. We'll say that they escalate to violent content faster. Some of that's trauma based, some of that's kind of unknown, the sources of that. But yeah, so I think men and women actually experience some very similar things and seek out some similar things. How they interact with the content is where the difference comes in. And then I think healing looks very different. I do think, and this isn't across the board, because I think women have a lot to learn from men's recovery. Men have a lot to learn from women's recovery. I think this can be interchangeable, but I do think men are much more motivated by sort of like this challenge aspect of recovery. I think accountability is really important for male recovery. This sense of like fraternity and brotherhood around this, and sort of this opposition, like I must fight this sort of thing. I have my hesitations around battle language. I gave an entire talk about that at a conference last year, but I do think for men it resonates a little more. For women, I think a lot of the healing that we see within Magdala is actually just, it's very relational. So um, support groups are a really ideal setting for women to recover, because as they hear each other sort of share their experiences, voice the same lies, the same triggers, the same fears, their own story starts to come together and make sense. And then they can also develop more charitable responses towards themselves in the midst of recovery. Because if I'm hearing another woman say something and it's like, that sounds like me, but I'm looking at that woman with love, and I would never respond to her with the same condemnation and shaming I respond to myself with. That changes a lot about the trajectory of my recovery. So I think that happens for men too, but I think women respond really relationally and really beautifully to just those elements of recovery and support.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned how the healing can look different too, because that was going to be my
Hmm.
follow-up question. Because if men and women experience pornography differently, or just sexual addiction in general differently,
Hmm.
then the healing is probably going to look different too. You talk about how women, the healing is primarily relational, but
Yeah.
you said in your story you had a lot of isolation in that. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, kind of going back to your story, I'm curious to know, like, did you grow up in the church? Like, was there a particular reason why you decided you wanted to start healing? And
Yeah.
because you did it in isolation, what did that look like for you?
Yeah. I did grow up in the church, grew up in a very devout family. My parents are converts from Methodism. So they raised us with just a lot of love for the faith, a lot of passion for the faith, and also a continued desire to learn about it. I think that was one of the benefits of being raised by converts who had converted only a few years before I was born, is they just had such an immense desire to continue learning about the faith that they had joined. So very devout family. I'm one of 6 kids. Um, yeah, I think I always knew that pornography was wrong. Like morally, I knew it was wrong. But I was taught about it solely from a perspective of like men struggle with this. And so as a woman, as a girl, how do you help men not be tempted towards lust, basically? Which I think is the result of purity culture's kind of infiltration of Catholicism. Um, and I think a lot of elements showed up in our chastity education, like a purity culture elements showed up in our chastity education. So I remember one youth conference I was at where the boys, got taken to one room and the girls got taken to another. And this was in the midst of kind of the more intense time of my regular use. I think I was probably 16, 17. And the guys got taken and they're talked to about porn and lust and all this stuff. And then girls are talked to about modesty and you're a princess, right? And so like I literally remember the speaker saying like, the men, in the other room, they're fighting an uphill battle and we need to help them. Um, and I remember feeling, number one, just like a pariah for being a woman struggling with the things that the men were getting talked to about. I was like, should I be in that room? What's wrong with me? And then something in me kind of pushed back against that message, even at the time of, okay, actually, I am a person. I am working out my salvation in fear and trembling, right? I have my own stuff. And should I not see to that? And do I not deserve support and grace in the healing of that? Or is my life about assisting men? And of course, I think we should keep, our brothers in Christ in mind. Of course, I think we should be assisting one another on the road towards heaven. But this idea that basically the existence of female sexuality is just not to be an obstacle to men before you're married, and then to be the fulfillment of male sexual desire once you are married, I think is incredibly toxic. And so like just those ideas kind of were floating around when I was like that actually I shouldn't be at all, or I shouldn't want it at all because I was a girl. And then also, not only was I failing myself, I was failing the men around me too at the time. And that all kind of came to a head in college when I met a really nice guy and he was pursuing me. And I just felt so unworthy of him. I felt so terribly unworthy. And that was when I really started the process of just laying this down. Was like, I I cannot I don't think I can love well if I don't try to get rid of this. Um and I think that was kind of the breaking point. Was I felt like I was being faced with a very pure invitation to love, and to love well, and I felt like I couldn't say yes to that invitation fully without letting go of this part of my life. So I'd already known, like I had always known it was wrong, but it was more like when the invitation to take a step further into a kind of love that I hadn't really exercised before. This was my first relationship. That was when I decided it was time to let it go. Um,
Wow.
yeah, yeah.
Was there anything even before that time or maybe around that time where it was maybe brought more to light, where you saw how the consumption of pornography was negatively affecting your life or your relationships? Like, was there anything palpable like that for you?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think some of our basic messaging on pornography is like it makes you objectify others, which is true. I think it does make you objectify others. What I like to focus on is the effects that it has on your own self perception. Um, I was I was deeply anxious towards the end of high school and early in college. I started developing pretty severe anxiety, and just like a lot of mood instability. So periods of what felt kind of akin to depression, though it was undiagnosed. But I just sensed like in my mental health, and which adolescence can bring on by itself, right? It's a very mentally unstable time being a teenager. Um, but pornography for me amplified that because when I was experiencing emotional instability, whether anxiety, depression, whatever, I would turn to porn to regulate, right? So that kind of altered my ability to cope with negative emotion. And so that's where I think the objectification of other people, I saw some of that playing out in my life, but more than anything, I saw this inability to regulate myself without it. And that was extremely negative. I also felt the shame that had been wrapped around some of the traumatic experiences that I had as a child, just the sense of shame that resulted from some bodily violation. I felt that sense of shame just dug deeper and deeper and deeper. So this kind of disconnection with myself, this dissociation from my body, this shame over my body, this lack of belonging in myself, that's more where I saw the effects of pornography. So um, and I think that's where I have resistance to fight language is because I would say that to myself. I'd be like, I have to fight this. I have to fight this. I have to fight this. I can look back on my journals, like I have a whole shelf of journals right here. That's why I'm looking over here. I can look back on my journals from when I was young, like when I was this age and consuming regularly. And it's just full of fight, 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 fight. But when the problem was that I was already disconnected from myself, I was lacking this sense of belonging to myself, this embodiment, or this at least acceptance of my embodiment. If that's my problem, and that's what I'm medicating through porn, and that's what porn is continuing to emphasize in me and make this vicious cycle out of, then fighting really doesn't help. Fighting doesn't heal that. It's integration is the call, right? Um, and so there was kind of this point, I think that's where that encounter in college came in, was just like, it's time to just lay the sword down. You actually have accomplished very little fighting this yourself. I had gotten a dumb phone for a little while and stuff like that helped, just didn't take it entirely away. But it's like, lay the sword down. Actually, I want you to come home to yourself. That's the task here. And that's sort of what the catechism says. That's the language of the catechism, is that chastity is an apprenticeship in self-mastery. It's a training in human freedom, right? It's a call to integration. That language, I think, is very opposed to a lot of the language that we've had around pornography and sexuality and sexual brokenness, which again is fighting. It's like this language of fear, basically, like fear of ourselves, fear of other people, don't be a stumbling block, like all of this stuff, to me is very opposed to the language of integration, which suggests, hey, this is a process. We all have broken pieces we're trying to gather back in here. And sexual brokenness might be one of those pieces, but integration suggests a process in which you're accompanied by a loving God. Like that's what it says to me. And so that's definitely a lot of the language that we try to use in our work now. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. I can get going and rambling clearly.
No, this is great. I love listening to you. I want to talk about, so you said fight language and how, especially when you were trying to overcome this at first, it's all fight, 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 fight. I have to fight this. And you said at the beginning that the way that you did it, and again, that this isn't necessarily, and it's not the ideal way, because the ideal way to heal is through relationship, but you said white knuckle. And to me, that screams fight. So I'm curious to know, how did you actually end up overcoming? I know you said there was a boy that was pursuing you and that kind of gave you the motivation, but how did it actually occur for you where you were able to overcome it?
Yeah, great question. So I mean that relationship ended up lasting like only a little while, and then we remained good friends. And it was actually the challenge to just be this person's friend whom I had previously really wanted to continue a relationship with, but he was going through a lot. It was actually the invitation to be his friend that was more transforming than anything. Of like, I'm going to love this person in the way they deserve and in the way they're asking me to, not in the way that I necessarily want to. That was a transformational thing for me, of just like, what is my desire for? Oh, it's for the good of other people. And that's for the good of me too, actually. So that's kind of what happened with that. But more than anything, the white knuckling, it was characterized by like a lot of fear of myself. And again, that shame, that disembodiment, that dissociation coming up. And it was not until 2.5 years later, when I graduated college. And again, I just had this like anxiety, just like really rearing its ugly head. I went into therapy with a really amazing Catholic therapist. I was at home for the summer with my parents and starting grad school, and decided to go to therapy to tackle, hopefully, anxiety. And then in my questionnaire that she had me fill out at the beginning of my intake forms, she said, like, have you had any unwanted sexual experiences? And I said yes. And then she brought it up in the first session. She was like, do you want to talk about that? And I was like, oh, no, it's fine. I've forgiven them. It was a long time ago. And then she asked one more question, and then I just started crying. And she was like, I think we got to cover this. Like, let's start here. And that's what we ended up focusing on for about 3 months, was these violations that I had experienced as a child, how they led into my pornography use, and then sort of the lies and shame I was carrying from years of use. And she made it make sense to me that, and she was the first person who had ever sort of broken this open for me. She made it make sense that my childhood experiences had created a framework in which my later sexual experiences needed to fit. So the framework given to me as a child, again, by these experiences that happened to me that were not terribly, terribly grave in the grand scheme of things. I hear stories every day with far more gravity. But still, they were violations, and I needed to take them seriously. But they created a framework for sexuality for me as a young child that said that, yeah, I am an object and I am to be violated. I am not safe. I'm not safe in my body. Like all of these messages. And it is a burden to other people to talk about this, like it just all sorts of things. It's too much to get into, but pornography fit that framework perfectly because when I went to porn, it reemphasized those messages of, for a second, it would make me feel like I had control over these feelings, right? But then it would end up saying the same thing of, you are an object, you are to be violated, you are not safe in your body. It said the same things. So it fit the framework perfectly. And so while I like white knuckled sobriety for, you know, a good 2 years, and I had, I think, 2 relapses within that, like a one-time relapse within that 2 years in college. And then it was about a year of sobriety by the time I got to therapy. Yeah, she was the first person to make that make sense of like, why was this appealing? And I think that's one of the most dangerous things about pornography or about unwanted sexual behavior to begin with, whether that's like hooking up or masturbation or whatever, is it just makes sense with a lot of people's frameworks, whether or not you have abuse or violation or whatever in your childhood. Um, it fits a lot of frameworks. That's why I don't love either like a lust versus love dichotomy of you're either lustful or you're loving. Is because I think when we collapse things like pornography or unwanted sexual behavior solely into lust, we kind of miss a lot of motivations that people are carrying in. Like, I think lust is a very good partner with a ton of things like trauma, boredom, loneliness. Like, so, I mean, so many different things come into play that aren't just lust motivated. Like for me, like I wouldn't say lust was my primary motivation in using pornography. It was a partner. It was definitely there, but my primary motivation was dissociative. And I think that can come into play for a lot of people too. But I mean, it's so varying depending on each person's story. But yeah, that summer, like in therapy, it was, I will always remember just like the palpable feeling of coming home to myself that summer, of like for the first time feeling safe in myself in a way that I never had. And that was, funny enough, that was also the summer I met my husband. So it was just like a very like sort of magical, like orchestrated, like healing sort of summer.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was just really beautiful. It was very raw, very tender, very hard at times, but there was like it felt like taking a huge deep breath in for the first time in many ways. So yeah, I think that's another element is like pornography and unwanted sexual behavior, especially in your childhood and adolescence. It re-traumatizes you, and so therefore it keeps the ground beneath you shaky. And so until it's gone, there's going to be this unsteadiness that you feel. And it took me a few years, even after it was not a regular presence in my life, to really sort of steady my feet. But that's the process. And some people, it takes decades to steady their feet, right? And I think I think it's such a tender, beautiful process if we let it be. That's another motivation in Magdala, is we want this to be a process that is beautiful and true, even when it's hard. But it can take a little bit. So again, I hope that answers the question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, this is so good. You know, it's funny. You said you found a good Catholic therapist, and I was just thinking, like, my life would be completely different if I hadn't found a good Catholic therapist. Like, that is life changing for
Truly.
the better, of course. Like, it really is. And I love how you talk about anxiety too, because actually, funny enough, I just had an appointment yesterday with my Catholic therapist, and we were talking through anxiety. And he gave me this example of another person he was working with who had said he's feeling really anxious and stressed, and it's primarily his work that's causing him to feel that way. And so he's looking for another job. And he was like, my therapist was saying, looking for another job isn't going to cure this anxiety. Like that, you think another job isn't going to be stressful. Like, let's actually work on the anxiety that you're feeling right now within this job. And once you have once you're able to regulate that healthily, then let's take a bird's eye view and see what other things need to change if they
Totally.
need to. But the anxiety oftentimes, I think, is brought about, it's not just the anxiety itself in a bubble, but there's something that we are trying to regulate, or that our body is saying, hey, I'm not okay right now. And that's where the anxiety comes up.
Mhm.
You talked about lust too being, especially for you, it's a pairing
Yeah.
to whatever other thing that you're experiencing. Do you think maybe this is different again in the male female framework, but do you think that for a lot of females, or maybe males included, that lust or pornography or masturbation or
Mhm.
sexual promiscuity, do you think that that is often accompanied by a trauma, or by something much deeper rather than just starting out with lust? Or do you think sometimes it is truly where lust is what is the
Mhm.
driver for the beginning of that?
Yeah, I hesitate to speak definitively, like, across the board, because I've heard so many stories at this point that they're all different and unique, so I don't wanna definitively say, "Yes, it is always tied to a trauma," but in my experience, in this field, I have yet to meet a woman who was motivated solely by lust. Like, that's just kind of the way it is. I think, I also take the stance that encountering pornography is traumatizing. So, everybody who has encountered pornography and uses it regularly is traumatized. Like, that's my stance. I think when we have a sexual experience that's outside of God's heart for us, it hurts us. You could call that a little trauma. Um, I think some of it is truly big T trauma because the content can be so awful. And the regularity with which it's consumed, I think, can be so awful. So, um, and then experiences with other people, like interpersonal experiences, can also obviously be deeply traumatizing, especially if they're involuntary or consent wasn't given. So I think, yes, my stance is that more often than not, trauma is part of the foundation. It's part of the source of use. Even if it's like a bunch of little things piled up, right? Like little emotional things in your family of origin, or you were not as welcome as your peers at school. Like little things I think can lead to this. And again, I've yet to hear a story for women, and I've actually heard a lot of stories from men. And I've yet to hear a male story that is just solely motivated by lust. And I think talking about lust absolutely matters, especially when we're talking about the moral realm or the realm of sin. Like I think it's very important. I just think it's not the whole picture. So that's why I like to say it's a very willing partner to many other maladies, to many other conditions. So um I think, and I just don't think we can recover well if we don't have the full picture. Is kind of my stance.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just thinking to myself, okay, what she's saying right now is the exact reason why my priest friend said, this girl, we can trust her with chastity's being. Because for so long, the narrative was love or lust.
Totally.
But lust is a disordered, it's a disordered desire for
Right.
another. It's not in God's design. It's not how we were made. And
Yeah.
so that disorder comes from something. Like
It
there's a
suggests an
reason.
order. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I love the way that you're framing that. And honestly, this too makes me go back to what you said earlier about how you were put in that girls' talk, the guys were put in the porn talk,
Mhm.
and your talk was primarily um, based on purity culture, was
Yeah.
primarily on how can you help the men not lust
Yeah. Yeah.
by covering every single square inch of you and
Oh,
all, yeah,
yeah.
all the things. And so I'm curious to know, like, in a perfect world, what should those talks look like? What
Oh.
should the talk from that a teenager gets? You separate the guys and the girls. What
Mm.
would you have wanted that talk to look like instead?
I don't think I've ever been asked this, so
Sorry if I'm putting you on the
No,
spot.
no, I also just wanna say I have, like, such respect for the people who have dedicated their lives to the chastity field. I think they've done
Sure,
amazing work,
of
so
course. Yeah.
I just have such respect for them, and I think they'd be the first to admit that they would change their messages a little bit now, right? Like, I think we're all in a learning process, so we have information now that they didn't have 20 years ago, right? Um, yeah, what would I want those to look like? I think I would want it to start first with this acknowledgement of grace, of just like you are going to mess up. Like, this is going to happen, right? Like, sexual brokenness, I believe, is a universal part of the human experience. Whether that's suppressive of like, I do not trust my sexuality, I'm afraid of it, I can't express it in a loving way, even in a committed relationship or marriage, like, because I'm just so scared. Like, I would say that is a form of brokenness. Obviously pornography uses, all of these things. Um, I think all of these are broken experiences. So I would say I would actually begin there of like, hey, when we share this message, we're sharing this from a place of knowledge that you're going to experience this if you haven't already. And so first of all, I'm just so sorry for the experiences that you have had or are having outside of God's heart. Let's talk about God's heart for you. Let's talk about how loved you are in the midst of this. And let's talk about what apprenticeship in self-mastery looks like. And that our church gives us guidance and gives us the tools to do this apprenticeship well, and to align our will to God's, which again can take time, takes a lot of effort, but it is worth it. Here's why it's worth it. That's the framing I would put around it. I would not do any like, this is what guys struggle with, this is what girls struggle with. And I know that like kind of freaks people out that I wouldn't do a ton of gender separation in talking about it. But at this point, like, I don't know, especially like adolescent boys and girls, they're doing a lot of the same things. Again, I think it's when we talk about the healing that the variations come in. But I just think we need a message of mercy. And I think you switch sort of the moral inversion that way, because at least what I was given is sort of this like, your chastity, your sexual purity is like a statue that you're given and this precious thing, and you must hold it in your hands and protect it, or every mistake you make chips away at that thing that you have been given. When on no other plane of the moral life do we talk that way. We don't talk about like, you're given humility and it's the statue that you must protect, and every moment of pride you chip away at it, right? Or you're given patience and every moment of wrath, right? Like, it's not like that. And so I think we need the proper moral grounding when we talk about chastity of, hey, actually sexual purity is not something you're given. You are given virginity. That's a gift, right? And it's a gift worth protecting. Is it the end all be all of chastity? No, it's not. I think we need to emphasize that too. But virginity is not the same as chastity, as integration. It's like you have to go through this whole journey in order to get there. And for some people, that journey is really short. It's kind of inconsequential. This is not going to be their biggest thing. Or this place where vice comes in really strongly. That's okay. For a lot of us, because of the culture in which we live, this is going to be a really, really tough thing. And so it's okay if this takes time. It's okay if this is a process. Here's, again, some guideposts on that process. I know that's more vague and less specific, but that's sort of what I would hope for. And when I've gotten the chance to, I don't give what I would say like quote unquote chastity talks a lot. I give talks on sexual brokenness usually, but when I've gotten to speak to high school or college students, I'm rarely invited to high schoolers. I think they're a little scared. Like, don't bring this girl into high schoolers. But college students, that's typically what I will say is like, yeah, you guys are probably in the thick of this right now. And that's okay, actually. That's to be expected. Here's the invitation of where you can go from here. But I think the message of a lot of the chastity talks I got where you take one wrong step and you're ruined, and you've ruined it all. And when you take that one wrong step, and if that's the message that you've gotten, you're like, well, why don't I keep on ruining myself then? It's all over anyway. And I hear a lot of women process that feeling of ruin, basically being the word, of just damaged goods. And I think that keeps people in a cycle of sin. I think that keeps people in a cycle of compulsion and addiction, if you shame them at the outset of their behavior. So that's kind of what I would hope for. Again, shooting into the dark, because I've never been asked that question before, but that's what I would
no,
that's what I would go for.
I so appreciate that. And I think too, it's got to be a difficult thing to balance the idea of you are not alone. This is very, it's not good, but it's normal. You're not alone. Sexual, what did you say earlier? You said sexual purity is not given to you.
It's not something you're given. Yeah.
Can you explain that a little bit more? What do you mean by
Sure.
that?
Yeah. So I think, again, one of the definitions that we were given in purity culture was like sexual purity is chastity. They're not the same thing. And sexual purity, I think, is actually like a very robust thing in the eyes of the church. So if we're talking about like just the understanding of the virtue of purity, actually several things go into it. I think the catechism says it's like purity of faith, sexual purity, and then it might be purity of intention. I can't remember another one, but there's like several things that go into the virtue of purity, and it is a virtue. So it's like something achieved, something fought for, um, and something developed, right? Like we aren't just born virtuous beings. I think we're born innocent, and that's a different thing. And some of that is like there's a little bit of crossover, but like if you have a toddler, we're not born virtuous, right? Like this is something that has to be learned. You have to learn to be kind. You have to learn to be patient. You have to learn to be courageous, right? And I think it's the same thing with sexual purity. You have to learn to be pure. You have to learn to be chaste. And again, for some people, that involves much less of an arduous road than others. And I think virginity and sexual purity got combined a lot, and especially in purity culture, it was like, this is purity, is if you're still a virgin. I think that the pressure of that was especially placed on women. I think it was placed on men too plenty of times, but I found the pressure to be, looking back over purity culture, I did a ton of research on this over the like 2 years just to see. I was like, are all of these messages what I remember them being? Yep. Oh, nope, they're worse. So I think virginity was placed especially on women. But the conflating of those two things of like, virginity is a good gift. It is a signal. It's a signal of what we're meant for, which is a loving communion of persons in marriage, or a renunciation of the communion of persons for the sake of God's kingdom, right? If we're talking in sort of John Paul II's language and his theology of the body, is those are the two invitations. So virginity is a signal of the gift, but it's when it was like conflated completely with sexual purity, then again, the moment that's gone, you feel like, oh, journey to purity's gone. There's no chance for me, right? And that's just it's a really reductionist view of virtue that we don't have anywhere else, and that somehow got adopted sort of in talking about sexuality. Does that make more sense? I feel like, again,
it
I'm
does.
getting used to talking about this too.
No,
But
I feel like when you're in a field, it's constant repetition because everybody has the same questions, which is good. This is how you get the message out. No, I very much appreciate that, especially putting it in the framework of a toddler. Like I have a 6'4" and a 2-year-old, so
oh yeah,
very much understand. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what I was saying earlier is I think it's a hard balance to talk about how sexual purity is not given to you. It's something that is a habitual practice to virtue, and how sexual brokenness is unfortunately the norm in our culture, and this is probably going to happen to you at some degree or some level. But then balancing that with how it's normal, but how it's still
God's
destructive.
Heart. Yeah,
it's not God's heart. Exactly.
It's so hard.
Yeah. So now I want to go into Magdala. What does healing through Magdala Ministries look like?
Oh gosh. Well, kind of with all that I've said, our main tagline when we're talking about the healing process in one of our small groups is we say intimacy over sobriety. So that doesn't mean that it isn't one of our goals to help women get sober from their unwanted sexual behavior. It's just that our primary goal for a woman who's going through the process with us is that she comes out on the other side with a deeper understanding of the intimacy with Christ that she has, or is meant for. And I believe that long-term sobriety, and deeper than long-term sobriety, I think that integration comes from intimacy with Christ. Right. I was reading one of Benedict XVI's homilies on Genesis earlier this morning, and he was talking about how, like in Christ, we see the picture of humanity, right? Like we see the picture of the human response to God. And so intimacy with Christ is where we find the place of like, okay, this is who I am meant to be. I am meant to look like him, right? And so what needs to leave my life in order to look like that? And what needs to come into my life in order to look like that? And that's why we prioritize the relationship with Christ above all else. So intimacy with Christ is first, sobriety is second, but we have plenty of psychological aids to hopefully help them with that behavioral change. I just find programs that solely focus on behavioral change to be sort of lacking. I don't think it ends up helping people with long-term sobriety in the way that doing story work, in the way that doing spiritual work, all those kind of things can help someone do. So that's our main tagline. But women journey through 17 sessions of our current curriculum. We're actually about to release the the third edition. It's just crazy. And it has 18 sessions. And in our new curriculum, actually, we have sort of 3 phases that are each tied to a certain part of like the sacramental life. So the first phase is baptism. So our focus is on immersion, like immersion into your story of like where you're at, what's the dance you're in right now, basically. But then also the promise of baptism of like, in God's eyes, this is who you are. This is the invitation of your life, is to live into this daughterhood. What does that look like? What does this life of discipleship look like in the midst of sexual brokenness and recovery? And then the second phase is internalization. So that's tied to confirmation of like, what does a confirmation of the promises at baptism look like? What does it look like to internalize the truths that God has spoken over you and over your sexuality, over your body? And then the third phase is integration. So that's tied to the Eucharist of what does it look like to integrate these truths that you have received into your life as it is right now? What does it look like to change your behavior in relationships, to change your approach to your body in your body image? What does it look like to forgive if you're called to forgive in your story, especially yourself? What does it look like to forgive yourself? So that's kind of the focus of our curriculum now, is like, how do we more deeply embed women in the sacramental life? And we have plenty of non-Catholic women that join us too, and I think they still find a benefit in that. But that's about to be released in a couple months, so we're excited to take that into our small groups. But that's what the journey looks like with us. We are, I love the women in our community. It's hundreds at this point, and just like the most unique women. So passionate, so smart, so funny, like just the most loving community of women. We have over 100 trained volunteers between our virtual small groups and then our campus and parish groups. And these women are just rock stars. They're incredible. I'm just like inspired all the time by this group of women. Their varying talents, their interests, where they come from, their vocations. We have women who are married with children. We have women who are in religious life. We have young college students who are just zealous and on fire and want to help women recover. I mean, it's amazing. It's like the feminine genius on display all the time. And I just love it. So that's kind of what Magdala looks like. Yeah, we're constantly growing and learning about how we can do better, but that's what it looks like today.
Yeah, that's awesome. Is it always a small group setting, just because of you talked about the importance of healing in relation?
Yeah, we don't offer anything one-on-one. We do a lot of like pastoral support one-on-one. So if a participant needs more time to process something, or we offer a lot of pastoral support to our moderators. My coworker Annie she heads that up. She does an amazing job. We do that, but we don't offer any like one-on-one coaching because none of us are clinicians. So I would rather refer someone out to a therapist if they need more intensive one-on-one help. I also have like connections with some rehab programs that I really trust. So if someone is really, really in need of that one-on-one assistance, we would rather refer them out to a trusted clinician than kind of venture into coaching ourselves, because I think recovery coaching can get a little dicey, all depending on the story. I think for some people it's helpful, but I just didn't want us to venture into that. It didn't feel like our mission.
Sure. What would you say to the girl or the woman that wants to be healed of this, sees the damage it's doing to her life, wants to be healed of this, maybe is drawn to Magdala, but is so embarrassed or fearful of joining a small group? What would you say to her?
Oh, I mean, I would say first, you can't scare me. So if it's more comfortable to reach out to me first, please do, because I've heard it all at this point. Gosh, yeah. I would validate the fear. I'd say, yeah, it's scary at first. It is hard. It's hard to log on to a meeting or show up to a group and know you're going to be talking about something that perhaps you've never spoken about before, right? It is scary. But I would also affirm that like the level of fear that you feel at the outset it does not match the level of relief that you feel once you've done it. Like once you've walked in, you said it, You've like let yourself be seen. The relief of being seen and all of the truth of where you're at is such a relief. And I think that unburdens us of a lot of the shame that we experience. Not all of it, but I've seen women log on to meetings and just start crying at the sight of other women there ready to admit that this is going on. Gosh, yeah, just such relief. So I would just say to the woman who's hesitating, like, just come on in. You'll feel better. I promise. Just get it over with. Rip off the Band-Aid. But truly, if it's better to just like reach out to our team beforehand, all of our contact is on the website, so you can do that. But yeah, I think the relief is so palpable. I see it all the time. So, and I love to see it. I think it's just such a testament to, again, the power of group work. But yeah, that's what I'd say.
Yeah. And I feel like women, I mean, men and women both are relational beings, but I feel like women especially, we are very relational. We are very imaginative. We are very, of course, there's something different about us, right? We have this feminine genius. And so healing in that group setting, I imagine that that's incredibly helpful and powerful for a lot of women. So thank you for, if somebody wants to find a Magdala group, how can they do that?
Yeah, so you go to our website, magdalaministries.org. We are a social media free organization, so you can't find us on any socials. If you do find us on socials, let me know, because that's not us creating it. Or if you want to engage with some of our content, before deciding about a small group, we have a podcast called the Magdala Podcast, because we are just infinitely creative and so imaginative about our podcast name. It's called the Magdala Podcast. You can find it on all regular podcast platforms and YouTube. And then we also have a blog on our website with just lots of testimonies, insights into female recovery, sexuality, that sort of thing, the spiritual life in the midst of sexual brokenness. It can be easier sometimes to just take in some of the content, kind of get a feel for our language, our approach, kind of what we're about, and see if it's a good fit for you. But if you're feeling compelled to join our waitlist, you can do so on our website. Again, our waitlist is sitting at I think it's over 1,000 as of now. When I say that, I don't mean that we go through 1,000 women before a new woman has the opportunity to join. We do first come, first serve for all of our groups, because a lot of women on that waitlist sign up and then actually aren't quite ready to join or decide they don't need it or whatever. So if you're feeling compelled to join, don't let the numbers scare you. Just go ahead and join, and you'll have the opportunity to get sorted into a group if it fits your schedule and your life. In the next couple of months here, I think, is our next group sort. So, yeah.
Awesome. Rachael, thank you so much for our conversation today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.